You guys are a lot of fun, by the way. This is great. In spite of our struggles, we can't take ourselves too seriously, and we've got to remember that the joy of the Lord is our strength. It's in Lamentations. We pray it in morning prayer. Even though the stalls are empty and there's no corn in the field and the crops all failed and everything's a disaster, still I put my hope in the Lord. So even in the toughest times, we can't remember that. We can't become forlorn and miserable and mopey, okay? Remember, sometimes things have to die before they can come back to life. It's the Paschal mystery, the cycle of dying and rising. Let's continue on. I just want to talk a little bit about the men who are successors of Peter and kind of the teaching of our church, and really in the last 50 years. I kind of make a bit of an outrageous claim in the book that the 16 documents of the Second Vatican Council, which I highly recommend you read. I've actually, even when I studied theology, met very few people who had actually read them all. But there's some amazing stuff in there. And I think we're just beginning now, 50 years later, to really understand what it was all about. Really, we are. And I'd like to claim that the two key insights of the council really was, I think, the universal call to holiness and the universal call to mission and holiness. But the key word is universal. Holiness and mission weren't foreign to us, but the key word is universal, that the call to holiness, to deep friendship with God and a life dedicated, because what does holiness mean? It means originally dedicated for God's purpose. We're not our own, right? We'd be bought and paid for. We are, here I am, Lord, send me. The call to holiness is universal, which means it's not rooted in ordination or religious profession. It's rooted in baptism. Baptism. We're all called to holiness. And we're all called to mission. We're all called to own the mission of the church. The mission of the church is not owned more by the ordained or the religiously professed. It's rooted in our baptism. As the people of God, the laity, we're not just called to collaborate with the leaders of our church in fulfilling the mission of Jesus. It's not just about collaboration, it's about co-responsibility. We all have equal responsibility before God for the mission of Jesus Christ. We just have different roles in the body. So those are, I think, two key insights that we've been struggling to unpack. And often, in our tradition, we have what some people call we're going to use a big fancy word, okay? Hermeneutic of discontinuity. Turn to your neighbor and say hermeneutic of discontinuity. Say it 3 times really quickly. That just means that when we look at the last 50 years, or even look back through the tradition, that our starting presumption is that it's not connected. There are breaks. But I believe in our Catholic tradition, there's this great, beautiful continuity. That's why we believe in what we call the development of doctrine, as we unpack and grow in our understanding of what God has revealed to us. It's not revolution, it's evolution. And there's been a great evolution since the Second Vatican Council. Still to this day, the single greatest magisterial document on evangelization was that written by Pope Paul VI in 1975, Evangelii Nunciandi, on evangelization in the modern world. 2 facts that often are missed about this document. It was written on the 10th anniversary of the close of the Second Vatican Council. Now, of all the topics that Paul VI could have chosen on the 10th anniversary of the council, he chose evangelization. No coincidence. Do you know who one of the key draft writers of that document was? Because it followed a synod. A certain Polish cardinal. That's right, Karol Wojtyła, who 3 years after that would become successor of Peter, and 4 years after that would start talking about new evangelization. And in 1982, he would define it. Continuity. By the way, I got to tell you the story. A couple of years ago, I was part of a small group of Catholic leaders who met with the Protestant pastor Rick Warren in Saddleback Church. And there was 30 of us in the room, and he came in. And sometimes I hear a lot of Catholics say, oh, Rick Warren, big mega church, those Americans, blah, 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 blah. This guy's the real deal, I got to tell you. He's a beautiful, humble man, holy man, incredibly gifted. He sat down, I was sitting in the front row, and he was actually closer to me than you are. And he leaned forward and pulled out of his back pocket of his jeans a dog-eared, tattered, first edition copy of Evangelisation, and he opened it up and he started to teach us from Pope Paul VI. And I was kind of looking, and I could see it was all underlined and writings in the comma and highlighted. It was amazing. So this was an amazing document. And what did Pope Paul VI do? There's two things in it. To begin with, he set the stage for the ongoing development in our thoughts around evangelization and how it relates to the mission of the church and all the things that we do. And in the document, you will find a very broad definition of evangelization that, in one sense, evangelization is pretty much everything the church does is evangelization. But within the document itself, there's a very clear articulation that the high point of evangelization in its purity is proclamation of the core message of the gospel, inviting people to respond, leading to conversion. He says, there is no evangelization worth the name if the name, the teaching, the promises, the person of Jesus of Nazareth, the Son of God, are not proclaimed. He says elsewhere, evangelization always involves the explicit proclamation of Jesus Christ. Explicit proclamation of Jesus Christ. For evangelization to be evangelization, the name of Jesus must be spoken. If it's not, don't call it evangelization. It might be pre-evangelization. Pre-evangelization is very, very, very important. In fact, it's absolutely necessary. Sometimes in Catholic circles there's a sense, well, like when I first went to St. Benedict Parish and started talking about evangelization, people were very uncomfortable. They're like, Father James, we're Catholics. So I just blamed the Pope. Paul VI and John Paul and Pope Benedict, is all their problems. So it's a very Catholic word, very, very Catholic. But we often sometimes say, well, I evangelize through my actions. Oh, I hope so. I hope so. I hope that you lead first with your actions, because if you're not living it, please don't keep your mouth shut. But Pope Paul VI in this document said, sooner or later, the witness of life must give way to the word of life. We begin with the witness of life. We begin by loving people, by serving people, by non-judgment, like warm, welcoming love. And when people say, what the heck is up with you? Why are you like this? Then as St. Peter says, always have your answer ready for those who ask the reason for your hope. Give it with gentleness and humility. That's when there's an openness. That's in our parish, because we've got a great tool like Alpha, that's what we say, well, why don't you come and check this thing out? People are like, okay. Because I've experienced something different in you. I've saw a glimmer of hope. I've experienced love. You see, without actions, our words are not believed. But without words, our actions are not understood. Unless you somehow believe that Christians have a monopoly on being nice. I know atheists who are wonderful, loving, kind, incredible people. So we need to bring words in have you heard that quote attributed to St. Francis of Assisi? Preach the gospel at all times, if necessary, use words. I hate that quote. Because number one, he never said it. I don't know who made it up. I'd like to find out who made it up. And secondly, it's not true. I don't believe. The kernel of truth in the quote, if what people obviously are getting at, is you've got to lead with your actions before you go to words. But it also sometimes mistakenly communicates that we don't need to speak about Jesus. Faith comes through hearing, we hear in Scripture. So Pope Paul VI, the incredible document. If you've never read it, go back and check it out. Pope John Paul II comes a couple years later. He starts talking about new evangelization. He defines it. Pope Benedict actually probably done more, he did more, in my opinion, in terms of the inner workings around new evangelization. He set up the office, he established the synod, and under his leadership, Vatican congregations and documents, they started using language that was never used before. They start in papal magisterial documents talking about personal relationship with Christ and personal encounter and becoming disciples. Pope Benedict was with the Latin American bishops in developing the great Aparecida document that I talk about in the book. If you don't know about it, you can read about it in the book, where the term missionary disciples came from. It's Pope Benedict. And of course, Pope Francis. And Pope Francis was actually the chief writer of the Aparecida document that Pope Benedict was involved in. Do you see the continuity? What we're talking about here is simply the flourishing of the insights of the Second Vatican Council. I remember when Pope Francis was first elected, I saw a triptych, a photograph of the three popes, John Paul, Benedict, and Francis. And underneath John Paul it says, "This is what we believe." He had a great charism. He was a great teacher. He reminded Catholics at a time when there was sometimes a lot of confusion. We had just come through an incredible amount of changes. There was disorientation. He reminded us of what we believed. And Pope Benedict, the German systematic theologian, drilled down and said, this is why we believe it. Very amazing theology and all this. Then Pope Francis comes along, and what was underneath his picture? Okay, now let's go do it. Let's go do it. Can we just do it now? We get it. We get what we believe. We know why we believe it. Time to do it. Let's go. And that's what everything that Pope Francis is about. Let's go. Let's be an outward-focused church. Let's not be a self-referential church. In the book's called Divine Renovation, as you know, and I use the metaphor of renovating a house. I've renovated a few rectories over my time, and there's a point when you renovate a house that you've got to, take out junk. You rip down the walls or whatever, and you take it all out. And I think for the renovation of our church, there's some junk that we need to take out. I really believe that everything we do in the church and the way we do it and the things that we presume are shaped by a theology. Theology shapes everything. And we all have a theology. We all have theologies. The church has an official theology, official teaching. You can find it in various sources in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. But there's often a gap between what the church officially teaches and what we live corporately as a church. There's a gap. Just as there is in my own life, if we're honest, in all of our lives. It's the single greatest burden of being called to preach the Word of God is the painful awareness that the guy at the corner store in Herring Cove was right. I'm a hypocrite. There's a gap between what I preach and what I live. Now, please help me, God, help me to close that gap, right? But there's a gap in our life as a church. And to close the gap, you've got to start by being aware of it. Because there's a kind of operational theology at work in our church that unless we address that, no matter what you do, it's not going to make much of a difference. And there are two things that I'd like to look at with you briefly, and this junk that needs to be taken out. What I call, don't be worried about the fancy words, Neo-Pelagianism and Clericalism. I've been, over the years, I just kind of got a mind that tries to analyze my experience in theology, and sometimes I can't get my brain to stop, but I've often thought for a long time about Neo-Pelagianism is a serious problem in our church, and clericalism as well. And I was greatly edified to see that when Pope Francis went to World Youth Day in Rio, he went to visit his old buddies at the executive of CLAM, the bishops of Latin America and the Caribbean. And he actually gave them a very challenging talk. He kind of rapped their knuckles. Because he had left them with this Aparecida document that called for complete pastoral conversion so that everything would be focused on making missionary disciples. Then it contains a process for forming missionary disciples, beginning with charisma and conversion and discipleship, and it's all there. And he basically said, hey, what have you been doing? What have you guys been doing? And he gave 5 temptations. The talk was entitled Temptations Against Making Missionary Disciples. And he gave a number of things, and I agreed with all of them, but I was very happy to see that 2 of them were these, and I was very pleased that Pope Francis agreed with me. So what do I mean by these things? Well, Neo-Pelagianism, just very quickly, what I mean by that is a recurrence in our present day of an old way of thinking that was called Pelagianism. Now, what is Pelagianism? It's named after a Celtic monk Celtic monk, supposedly, but I'm sure he must have been English. Only kidding. Who lived in, I think, Alexandria, and he had been a priest in Rome for a while, and he was what you would call a rigorist. He had been really turned off by the lifestyle of Christians that he saw in Rome, just as St. Benedict was. And he really was dismayed by what he saw. And he said, people just really need to pull up their bootstraps. And his way of thinking was that, if we just really try hard enough, we can do the good that God wants us to do. We can be the people that God wants us to be. And in a sense, he basically denied what we call original sin, which basically says, try as we might, we can't do it of ourselves. We need outside help. We need God's grace. That it is through God's grace that we are saved. And St. Augustine and Pelagius had big, long conversations over letters about this issue, and it got quite disagreeable. This way of thinking was actually identified eventually as, look, this is not faith, this is not really represents our tradition. Heretic, and so this is a way of thinking that as actually officially being defined as our church, this is not who we are, this is not what we believe. We actually believe that everything is God's work. It's not even that, okay, I take a step towards God, God takes a step towards me. They said, not even that, that's semi-Pelagianism. God does everything. It is God who gives us the desire and everything. Now, you may say, well, what about human will, human freedom? Where does that come in? Well, it's one of those both and things. God does everything and we do everything. We're completely free. But everything is the work of grace. It's a mystery. It's been, people have been trying to figure this one out for 1,500 years, where fistfights broke out at the University of Paris over this. So don't worry about it too much. Just remember, just like Jesus was fully human, fully divine, the work of grace, fully human, fully divine, okay? But we can't do it by ourselves. Now, why would I say there's neo-Pelagianism? Do you have air miles in this country? Air miles. Okay, let's choose frequent flyers. So you fly enough. We have, you frequent fly, you rack up the points, and if you get enough points, you get a free flight, right? And a lot of people bring that attitude towards faith. I rack up points, and I do things for God, and if I get enough points, God lets me into heaven. But Scripture is quite clear that salvation, the life of grace, it's not a reward per se. I mean, in some passages in the Scripture, there is the language of reward and all of this, but reward in the sense that the fruit of the very thing we do is the reward. But salvation in the life of grace is we can never deserve it. We're unworthy. But yet God loves us. And it's a free gift. There is nothing we can do to make God love us more than he already does. Can we get that into our heads? There's nothing we can do to make God love us less than he does. Even when we are worse, God's love is unceasing. He might not love what we're doing, but never stops loving us. But we're so formed in conditional relationships. We're broken human beings, and from a young age, and no matter how wonderful our parents are, we somehow communicate that if you act in a way that pleases me, I'll love you more. And if you annoy me, I'll love you less. And so we're shaped by that. We have an innate sense of justice, which is a good thing. And so we innately think that by acting a certain way, surely I will reap the love of God, and if I act, I will be punished. But God's love and mercy is very unjust from a human perspective, isn't it? I mean, remember the parable of the guys in the vineyards? Don't you feel bad for those guys? The first guys start at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they're going to 7 o'clock at night. And these schmucks, they started 5 o'clock, they show up, they've been, what if they, hanging around all day? They must have been in the bar when the guy was there the first 4 times. And they show up, and they, do a little bit of work. They don't even break a sweat. And then they come first, and they get a full day's wage. And it's totally understandable. The guys in the back of the line are going, oh, those guys only work 1 hour. We're in the money. And they come and they're like, what? This is not fair. Is it fair? Hello? No, it's not fair. It's not fair. It's the same as the prodigal son, right? I've been working. You hear the pain in this boy's voice, don't you? I have worked like a slave for you. And this son of yours, you've killed a fatted calf for him. He's so angry. But he's missed the whole point. The father says, what are you talking about? You know, when the pain in his voice when he says, oh, you never once gave me a goat that I could have a party with my friends. The father's like, what are you talking about? It's your goat. You could have a goat anytime you want. Don't you realize that this is not reward for good behavior? Like, it's all yours. It's a free gift. But when we don't get that, when we don't understand it, when we don't have it in our hearts, it becomes transactional. Faith is a transaction, tit for tat, air miles. And I don't know about you, but when I go shopping, I want to get what I want for the lowest possible price, for the least amount of trouble, right? This is the fruit of Pelagianism. So this is what we experience when people come knocking the door for sacraments or different things. They want a product for the least amount of price, the lowest price, and the least amount of bother. I mean, so there's a culture of minimalism that this breeds. I mean, in our catechetical tradition, it was never an official catechism, but this question was asked. How much of the Mass can you miss and still have it count? Do you remember that one? What the hell? I mean, ladies, could you imagine if your husband said, look, okay, I'm thinking about marrying you, but I just want to find out a few things. I'm just wondering, how much do I have to actually be around you? I'm just wondering how much I can ignore you and not be with you and still have it still count. I mean, it's preposterous. And yet marriage is the image of the church. The Christian life is the celebration of the wedding feast, the wedding of the Lamb. Like, this is covenant life. It's gracious, it's abundant, and we want to say, what's the lowest price? Tell me the bare minimum I have to do, and I'll do it. Because that's what you do when you're buying stuff. And what's the least amount of inconvenience? So that's the fruit of Pelagianism. But the other thing is it robs your joy. Do you know why? Because there's no good news. Do you know why there's no good news? Because there's no bad news. I mean, if I say to you, great news for you, you're cancer-free, you're thinking, what are you talking about? I don't have cancer. You're not going to go tell anyone how happy you are that you don't have cancer. But if you know you're dying, and you've been healed, and you're cancer-free, you're going to tell everyone, and everyone's going to tell everyone, because there's good news, because there's bad news. But we think that somehow today it's like, it's not even that God owes me salvation because I'm so good. No, God owes me salvation because I haven't been an axe murderer. But salvation is a free gift from God when we seek Him in faith and love. And if there's no good news, why would there be evangelization? Which is to announce the good news. And why would there be any new evangelization? And it's why there's often so little joy in our churches. Many years ago, when I first went to my new church, at the beginning, at our 9 o'clock Mass, which is, even then, was a bit more lively than usual. You know, sometimes kids say things out loud in Mass at the most awkward times when, like, everything's quiet. It was quiet, and this little voice said, Mommy, why does everyone look so sad? So it's the mystery of grace. That's the thing. Neo-Pelagianism robs us of the experience of grace. Grace in mercy. This is what Pope Francis is all about. This is why we've had this year of mercy. It's amazing grace. It really is. And so many people don't know it. Sometimes I think that's why we often don't sing in church. I mean, I think it's chemical that when we're filled with joy, we sing. No matter if we get the worst voice ever, we just sing. And so many of us, we've got nothing to sing about because we're doing our duty. We're paying the minimum price and gritting our teeth. And even in my own parish right now, I mean, there's been, through God's grace, and it's such an amazing change and the sense of joy and everything, and there's still some parishioners who are, and it's almost like, look, they're suspicious because we're having so much fun. Like, it really is, like, if you're not miserable, you're not doing it right. This isn't so too joyful. So it's, and then clericalism. Okay, get me going about this. Now, it's funny, clericalism is a word that if you throw it out there, people have very different definitions. People like, oh, clericalism, that's guys who wear like Roman collars, or people who dress up in these fancy long things, you know, the cassocks, and people who are right into vestments, the priests are right into vestments. But I've met, some of the most clerical priests I've ever met are shirt and tie guys. It's got really nothing to do with what you wear. I mean, I remember a priest friend of mine who is a very wise man. When I was a young seminarian, at that point I was definitely going to be a collar-wearing priest. I still am. I wear my collar most of the time. I don't wear it to bed or anything, but he was a shirt and tie guy, and I love him dearly, but he said to me, James, now I'm not going to use the exact word he used. He said, if you're a you will be a whether you're wearing a collar or your bathing suit. It really doesn't have to do with what you're wearing. But clericalism is an inner attitude, and it really is, I think, a disease in our church that is killing us. Here's my definition of clericalism: the appropriation by the clergy of what is proper to the baptized. The appropriation of the clergy, the taking to themselves of what is proper to the baptized. And when I say clergy, I don't just mean ordained, I mean religiously professed, and even professional lay people who work in the church. They have entered into the clerical caste and minister in a clerical fashion. What's the difference? Clericalism basically says it's the appropriation of what is proper to the baptized. Holiness and mission. Holiness and mission is my job, not your job. You sit back and watch me. I'll do all the work. I'll do all the ministry. And you go, oh, Father, you're so wonderful. You're so wonderful. You're Father, 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 Father. You know. And the priest is like, yeah, this is great. I'm the super Christian. And I'm put up in a pedestal. But when you go home at night, it's not so great. Because holiness and mission is the priest's job, it's the nun's job. The only people who give their lives to Jesus are priests and nuns. Normal Catholics don't do that. And if you were a normal Catholic who did that, well, I guess you better join the seminary, go to the convent, because normal Catholics don't do that stuff. We just, you know, come to Mass, find the fastest Mass in town. I remember when I was 13 years old, I lived in a part of, hey, I got to tell you a story. Do you know there's a great connection between Nova Scotia and Australia? Your St. Mary MacKillop, her family, when they moved from Scotland, one branch of the family moved to Australia, the other branch moved to Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. When I moved from Scotland, we actually lived for a year in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, about 100 kilometers away from where Mary MacKillop's family were. I was 13 years old, and my friend and I, there was a Mass on Saturday afternoon, so it was the weekend Mass, at a retirement home. The Mass was 20 minutes long. I, to this day, have no idea how the priest did it. But that's not the point. The point was, it was mobbed. The room was packed with people. There was people lining the hallways, all up and down. They were like 300 meters. You couldn't hear or see anything. People standing in the hall. 20-minute Mass, good, get my communion. And then right back to the parking lot. It's like, I was there, I saw it, I did it. What was I talking about? So it's that minimalistic thing, right? Because holiness and mission, that's not my job, that's your job. I remember my first parish when I was doing the Alpha and I was trying to encourage people, I'd always personally I'd like drive people crazy. Well, you do Alpha, you do Alpha, you do Alpha. And this man one time, I'll never forget this, he turned to me, looked right in my eye and he said, Father, he said, I'm just not that religious. And it was like a bolt of lightning, and I realized, yeah, that's it. Like, I'm breaking the contract, and he's right to be angry with me. That's not his job. His job is to show up and go home, and maybe say his prayers at night, and don't kill anyone. So Clericalism is the appropriation. Now, I want to share with you, there's a scripture passage, letter of Ephesians chapter 4, where St. Paul talks about the gifts that God has given to the church. So some are called to be pastors, to be prophets, teachers, evangelists, etc. And he says that the role of pastor, he says, is to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for the building up of the church. So think about that. So the job of the pastor is to equip the saints, to get the saints, the people, the holy ones, the people of God, to equip them, to form them and give them what they need so that they can do the mission of the church. But even to this day in North America, in the translation we have of the scriptures in the breviary, that passage reads this way. The role of the pastor is to minister to the saints, comma, to do the work of ministry, comma, for the building up of the church. Do you get the difference? And that's what we've got. Father does everything. We are the embodiment of what the Christian life is meant to be. And this is very, very debilitating for us. I'll give you a very quick example of how I experienced this. When I was vocation director, people would come and talk about feeling called to the priesthood. And I always say, tell me how you experienced the call. I'll never forget this one guy said, well, you know, I really want to grow in my prayer life. I said, great. He said, I really want to serve people. Great. I really want to learn and know more about theology. Great. He said, I really want to help other people know Jesus. Great. And I'm waiting, and nothing else is coming. I'm thinking, sounds like baptism to me. I didn't hear anything about, I had this burning desire to preach the Word of God. I have this recurring image every time the Eucharist is lifted up at the altar. It's like my heart beats fast. When I think about ministering to people in the sacrament of reconciliation, I'm overwhelmed with God's mercy. I want to help the sick in the sacraments, or I see what's happening in the church. Things are not what they could be, and I really have this desire to lead, because the Second Vatican Council said that the role of the priest is to preach the Word of God, celebrate the sacraments, and to lead God's people. Leadership, preaching and celebrating sacraments. That's the core of the priesthood. What I heard from this guy was baptism. But you see, because of our culture, if you were that religious, that meant you had to be a priest or a nun. So that's a system that's still very much with us. And we see it manifested in parishes. And you've got this codependent relationship, very unhealthy at times, where the people need the priest and the priest needs the people to need the priest. The priest showing up at everything, micromanaging, controlling everything. People feeling that their ministry is not validated unless Father pops in or talks to them, and they've got to run everything by Father. Or that the only way to have a meaningful experience of church is to have a personal connection with the priest. I mean, eventually, if you're in a church big enough, that simply becomes impossible. That's why our churches need to be communities of communities. So that's a very challenging thing. Okay, I want to talk to you guys about culture transformation. That's called an iceberg. We have those in Canada. You know, I want to talk to you about cultural transformation. Look at this iceberg. I want to show you a beautiful picture here. Check this out. Isn't that amazing? 10% of the iceberg is what's seen above the water. 90% is underneath. It's invisible. You don't see it. You see, every organization, every group of human beings has a culture. And by culture, I don't mean ethnicity. I'm not talking about that. Culture are the presumptions that a group of people collectively make that are often unconscious, that shape behaviors and shape the outcomes. Culture is revealed by what we celebrate, by what we reward, by what we measure, by what we tolerate. Culture comes out of lived values, values that are actually lived. When we often talk about values in organizations, we talk about the things that we would like to say we value. And that's great. Those are called aspirational values. It's what we aspire to be. We've all heard it. You know, parishes say, we are a welcoming, open parish. And you go to it and it's like, get out of my seat. You know, it's like, no, you're not. You might want to be that, and that's good, but that's not what you are right now. Let's actually talk about what we value. So the 10% of the iceberg are the things, the flowery things we say. And usually aspirational values. Those are have you ever seen those big fancy mission statements? You read them, you're thinking, what the heck? Like, were they on drugs when they wrote this? Like, it's like a mishmash of what we want to be and what we do and what we value and blah, blah, blah. And it's all one big long sentence, and no one understands what it means and no one reads it. And we have lists of values and all this. But it's what's under the water that floats an organization. And often we're totally oblivious to the culture. It's what we presume to be the norm. And if you want to discover your values, there's two very easy ways to do it. Look at your budget and your calendar. Look at how you personally as individuals, look at how you spend your money and how you spend your time. As a church, look at how you spend your money and how you spend your time. As a diocese, look at how you spend your money and how you spend your time. I don't care what you say you value. What you really value will be revealed by what you spend your money on and what you spend your time on, how you use your facilities. And for the average Catholic family, parish where I come from, our primary value is our buildings. We have something in Canada called snow. It's what happens when there's precipitation. It's quite cold, and the water crystallizes and falls. And if you get enough of it, it's white, and it covers everything. It's quite remarkable. It can be fun. If the temperature rises a little bit, you can pack. It's called snow. You can pack it and make a globe, and you can throw it at people. It's a lot of fun. Just don't do that once it freezes, because you could put them in hospital. Anyway. So think about, here's a real difference. Like, I know you guys do air conditioning and stuff, but it ain't nothing on heating a building. Bishop, the cathedral rectory that I used to live on, in the cathedral, it cost like $80,000 a year just to stop the place from freezing. Like, buildings cost a fortune. And and parishes are spending 90% of their available resources, and that's in a good scenario, on the building alone. And the buildings are declining. They're not even getting repaired. So we're putting everything into buildings. And if you even raise the point about, do we actually even really need this building? Because there's another church half a mile down the road. And by the way, we've got 4 masses here, and the church is only like 1/7 filled. People will kill you if you even hint about closing the building or addressing the infrastructure. So what do we value? We value buildings, number one. We value working with children. Children's catechesis. Not even children's evangelization. Children's catechesis is our highest value next to our buildings. Why? Because that's what we do. I don't care about all you say about adult evangelization. What do? We value teaching children. And it's always struck me as weird, because when you look at what Jesus did, Jesus taught adults. He evangelized and taught adults. Look at what he did with Zacchaeus and all the people. He went, he ate with them, he drank with them. He went to the unchurched, to the fallen away, and revealed God's love to them, and then he taught them. Jesus evangelized and taught adults and blessed the children. What do? We teach the children and bless the adults. So that's what we value. And the other value, our highest value, is convenience. And that's a convenience because of the Pelagian thing, because of the consumer mentality. I mean, if you're a retailer, if you're in that kind of business, you want to make the sales experience as least painful as possible. So we value convenience. So often when I speak to church leaders and even people who say, "Oh, I loved your book, and we're gonna do this," it's like as if it's just a list of to-dos. And if you do this, and this thing, you're going to see change in your church. It's not. Divine Renovation is not a curriculum, it's not a program, and it's not a to-do list. It starts with a conviction that healthy things grow and bear fruit. Parents, did you ever have to sit your kids down and say, "Now I want you to grow"? No, you keep them healthy, you feed them, and they grow all by themselves. And it's the same in the church. If the church is healthy, spiritually healthy, humanly healthy, and in order to be spiritually healthy, you've got to be humanly healthy because grace builds on nature. It doesn't replace nature. The church will grow and bear fruit. You will see that cycle of health. So many of our churches at home, there's a cycle of decline. I mean, I called the book From Maintenance to Mission. Most of our churches are not even maintaining. They're declining. And when I say maintenance, I don't just mean maintaining buildings, I mean maintaining the flock. Do you know how hard it is to maintain the flock today? There's wolves swirling around the flock. There's an acidic environment. If we just maintain, we're losing people all the time. There's so many people, even in my church, who said, I had 1 foot in and 1 foot out. I didn't even know what I was doing here. And I think of one man who did Alpha and had a conversion, and now he's on our Prison Alpha ministry team. A wonderful story. It's hard to maintain the flock. But we're not just talking about maintaining the flock. We're called to go on mission. So it's not about best practices. It's not even about getting the best plan or the best people or the best program. I mean, any program, even what I believe a program as great as Alpha, is only as good as the church that runs it. What if people come to Alpha, and the whole point of Alpha is that it begins with a process of belong, believe, behave. We help people belong, we love them, we welcome them, there's no judgment, we do everything with sensitivity towards the people who don't believe. We watch your vocabulary, because as Catholics we're terrible at being aware of how churchy we are. And we do everything for that person. We love them, no matter how messy their lives are. You have a meal with them 10 weeks in a row, and during that time, trust is built. And they're hearing a simple gospel message that is designed for the outsider. Can't tell you how many insiders listen to those talks and say, they didn't talk about this. It's not for you, it's for them. And as they hear that message and they experience the love and support, they begin to open up. They begin to believe. And when they begin to believe, then you're able to start talking about how they behave. I cringe when I think back to when I was a young priest. And I'd have young couples coming to see me who were wanted to get married, not going to church, living together. I'd be very nice, like I really was, very, very nice. And I'd say, tell me how you fell in love, blah, 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 blah. Then I'd always get to the point where I give them a little lecture about they're not coming to church, and then I'd get to I see you're living together. And I'd always have the little talk about, wrap up the gift, put it back under the tree and all this. And what are you laughing at? But it's like they didn't belong and they didn't even believe. Like some of them, they didn't believe. Like they believe like maybe God exists, there's some energy out there, and I'm going to behavior. It's that used to work like 50 years ago when there were very strong societal norms that governed behavior. I mean, people generally knew what was right and wrong behavior, and lines of belief were drawn very firmly. Where in Nova Scotia, in some small towns, literally, what side of the railroad tracks you lived on, the Anglicans lived on this side and the Catholics lived on that side. I mean, you knew what you believed. You went to Catholic school, it was drilled into you. You didn't even hang out with them. You went to Dooley's Catholic Club, That's a place in Sydney. I was there the other night. And if you believed, and if you behaved right, and if you believed properly, we'll let you belong. But that doesn't work in a postmodern culture anymore. We've got to begin with belonging and help people to come to believe and then address their behavior. Isn't that what Jesus did? Zacchaeus, come down. I'm going to your house for supper. That's Alpha. I'm going to love you. I'm not going to judge you. I'm going to come to your house for supper, and we're going to talk. And you're going to come to believe, and then you're going to behave. Except for him, it was quite accelerated. I mean, he jumps down from the tree and goes, all right, giving half my stuff away and not going to rip people off anymore. Let's go grab a hamburger. Okay, so, but that process, and that's what Alpha does, right? So people come to Alpha and they're like, oh, this is amazing. People are so loving and non-judgmental, no pressure. Because the thing is, in Alpha, if you don't want to come back, you don't come back. No one's going to call you. No one's going to come knocking on your door. And that's quite upfront. The invitation is often, just come for 1 week and check it out. If you don't like it, no problem. So people experience this wonderful environment of welcome and hospitality, and there's good music, the talks are fantastic, they're relevant, I can understand them. And then we have the small group. And the point of the small group is to actually, the small group hosts don't talk. They facilitate conversation. The point is to listen. You see, it's a dialogue. During the talk, the guests listen, and during the small groups, the hosts listen. The guests get to talk. And the process goes from there. So they have this experience, and then they say, wow, I totally got the church all wrong. I thought they were a bunch of judgmental, grouchy, unhappy people, and that when they got together it was boring and irrelevant, and then, lousy music and all of that. And so I'm going to go to church on Sunday. And you come. And you know what comes next? In the average parish. No welcome. No one looks at you, like people scowling at you. Maybe not good music, or the homily is like boring or irrelevant, using big words that no one can understand, and it's a very different experience. It's almost like false advertising. So that's what I mean, is that we've got to address that experience. So cultural transformation, sorry, I'm going a little off base here, but here's the thing. The business guru, Peter Drucker, in the realm of business, said this, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Again, you can have the best plan, you can have the best people on your staff, the best ministry people in your parish, the best program, the best process, blah, 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 blah. But if you don't change this, nothing's going to change. Nothing is going to change. And the task of leadership in the church today, the task of leading renewal at the parish level is not about best practices. It's not a to-do list. It is about leading cultural transformation so that what we once considered to be normative and what we considered to be weird, the weird thing is now normal, like adult faith formation, evangelization, Jesus actually changing people's lives, talking that way, having people share their stories, being outward focused, being inviting, getting involved in ministry and serving, giving financially to support the mission of the church, joining small groups, joining mid-sized groups. All the stuff that's happening in my parish today, if the people knew it 6 years ago, they would have lynched me. But it's a slow process, and it takes time. And there's no quick fix to this. It takes time. And cultural transformation also, therefore, needs long-term leadership. And whenever I have a chance to speak to a bishop, I always put this in. You know that not all priests can be in their parishes for long-term leadership, but we need some priests to be in long-term leadership. We need to say, who are the priests with that particular gift? Because priests are a wonderful bunch. I have particular gifts, but I've got a whole bunch of stuff I'm terrible at. And James Mallon by himself is a train wreck. I'll tell you that, because I'm good with vision, good with communication, getting things going, inspiring people, but I keep accelerating and driving it until the whole thing blows up. And also, I'm so focused that when I get focused on something, on my task, I achieve it, and I turn around, and there's bodies all over the ground. I'm like, what happened? And they're like, you happened. And it's very painful. I'm serious, because in my ministry, I've hurt people. I didn't even see it. I didn't know it. I certainly didn't intend it. And I've learned that it's not an excuse, but sometimes in your cell phone, you're with a bunch of people, and I'm like, I've only got one bar on my cell phone. What about you guys? No, 5 bars. I'm like, I've only got 1 bar. I just think I've only got 1 bar in that area. And I need people around me who see things that I don't see, who can smack me and say, do you realize what you just did? What you just said? I'm like, no. And so I need that to be a better leader. So I might have gifts, but there's a whole bunch of gifts that I don't have. And if you're out there as a priest and you're hearing this talk and you're thinking, I'm not like you. You don't have to be like me. Get people around you who can fill in who you are. I like to say there's no such thing as a well-rounded person, but there is a well-rounded team. And we need to change how we lead as priests, even as bishops. We need to lead out of a team, not just lead a team, lead out of a team. We need to bring people around us. We need to be vulnerable. We need to be honest about our strengths and our weaknesses. We need to allow those around us to hold us accountable, to even disagree with us. Not about the vision, not about where we're going, but disagree about how we're going to get there, because otherwise you're never going to make the best decisions. So I think there's a lot of stuff that has to change around that, because cultural transformation is difficult to lead. And it takes time. And so I believe we do need to potentially identify the priests with those kind of gifts and put them in our parishes with the greatest potential and set them up for long-term leadership. Give them time. I really believe it takes at least 12 years for transformation. You can change a lot of stuff, but the difference between change and transformation is when you change something, you can change it back. When something is transformed, you can't change it back. And in the church, when a church is transformed, the people don't want to go back because they've seen something and experienced something different.